ranking the conferences. It's what we do here at the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you stopping by for the best in discussion, debate, and analysis. This is one of my favorite off-season projects, to rank the conferences, not by throwing darts at the wall, not by just my perception, not looking at NFL draft selections or recruiting rankings, or the famous, if they would have played them, they certainly would have beaten them by 2 or 3 touchdowns. That's for sure. No, it's about the actual results on the field all through the regular season, all through the postseason. We have looked at and will be accounting for every game in the regular season and the postseason, every game in college football, but specifically grinding down those games between the power conferences. And to take it to the next step, again, it's not simply about, well, the Big Ten went 13-9 against power conference play, and the SEC went 13-12, and the ACC went 12-24, and there you've got your rankings. No, it's about seeding the teams. We have seeded all the teams based on standings within the conferences. Based on logic and based on the standings, we have seeded the teams. Therefore, we can give context to the wins and losses, meaning if the best team in the Big 12 beat the best team in the Big 10, that game should have a certain value. It should have more weight and more value than if the Big 12 champion defeated the 10th best team in the Big 10, or if the worst team in the Big 12 beat the ACC champion, then that should be given more weight than if the worst team in the Big 12 just beat the worst team in the ACC. You'll see it play out here at the Voice of College Football. Please like and subscribe. Let's break it all down, starting with the Big 12. We're going conference by conference, and then at the end, we add it all up. We're also going through point differentials. Some people will comment down below, I'm expecting it. Doesn't matter if you win by 1 or win by 50. Exactly. When you're talking about standings within a conference or national standing, it doesn't matter. But when you're talking about evaluating teams, and by extension, evaluating conferences, yes, it does matter. It does tell us something that if Iowa State beat Iowa by 1 point, that's a different value than if Iowa State would have defeated Iowa by 50 points. That's a different football game and a different measurement of the quality of the teams and by extension, the quality of the conferences. So we're going to break it down top to bottom here at the Voice of College Football. Again, like and subscribe. Big 12 went 7-12 against the power conferences. They played the least amount of games against the ACC, the Big 10, and the SEC. Here are the wins. Arizona State against Mississippi State. Before we knew the Sun Devils were good, they won by a touchdown at home against the worst team in the SEC. Iowa State with 2 wins against power conference teams. Last-second field goal to defeat their rival Iowa. And, of course, the bowl game win against Miami with Cam Ward in the first half, without Cam Ward in the second half. BYU with one of the most talked about games as it pertained to the CFP against SMU. Cougars won it by 3, 18-15. TCU with a touchdown win against Stanford. Kansas State against Rutgers in a 3-point win in a bowl game. Way back in September, Oklahoma State, before we knew that they were going to be lousy, 0-9 in the conference, defeated Arkansas, coming back from 3 scores down to win in overtime. Note the seeding differences in all the games. We will get to that in just a second. Now the 12 losses for the Big 12 against the other conferences. In an epic classic, Arizona State lost the game, but certainly acquitted itself against Texas, outplaying the Longhorns for much of the game, but Texas won the game in overtime. Nebraska over Colorado. Some people would argue the Buffs got much better late in the season, but when they met on the field, the reality is that Nebraska won the game by 18 points as a 13 seed in the Big Ten. Big win over Colorado, the 4 seed. LSU over Baylor. What we did here with the SEC is we've got a log jam of 5 and 3 teams, and it was not fair or equitable to give them different seedings going all the way from number 4 all the way down to number 9 because there wasn't that type of separation. So we averaged out the seedings for those 5 and 3 teams in the SEC to come out to 6.5. So LSU in a 13-point bowl win against Baylor, a 6.5 seed defeats a 5 seed. SMU defeated TCU by 24 points. Arkansas with a win in a bowl game, 39-26 over Texas Tech. So that's the 11 seed in the SEC defeating the 4 seed in the Big 12, Washington State over Texas Tech. So that's an arbitrary seed. I had to give some perspective to this one. Washington State, Oregon State, the only two teams in the Pac-12 left. Still consider them Power 5 teams. Washington State finished 8-5 with a lesser than average power conference schedule, so I gave them an 8 seed. Penn State over West Virginia as the Mountaineers lost 2 outside the conference against power conference teams. A close loss to Pitt. Illinois over Kansas. We did not know at the time the Illini would vault all the way to a 5th seed in the Big Ten. There we've got Pitt against Cincinnati as the Panthers came back to win 28-27. Oklahoma, a low 13 seed in the SEC, defeated Houston 16-12. Florida over UCF as the Gators finished at 8-5, number 10 seed in the SEC. UCF at number 14 in the Big 12. So from a seeding standpoint, the worst loss by the Big 12 was Colorado, the 4 seed, losing to a 13 seed in Nebraska. Texas Tech, a 7 seed, loses to Arkansas, an 11 seed. And those were really the 2 games that jump out from a seedings difference standpoint. So in those 7 wins by the Big 12 against the ACC, the Big 10, and the SEC, they were 26 seeds higher than those teams that lost the games from those other conferences, and this is going to mean much more when we put it all together in the final video. But basically, the teams that were expected to win, like Arizona State, 15 seeds higher than Mississippi State. So 15 of those 26 are represented in the Arizona State win over Mississippi State. Iowa State, a 2 seed over Iowa, 6 seeds, so that's a 4 seed difference. So the Big 12 had 26 seed differences against the teams that they defeated. The only game that they won in which they had a lower seed win was Oklahoma State at 16, defeated Arkansas at 11, and actually BYU, a 3 seed, defeated SMU, a 2 seed out of the ACC. In the 12 losses by the Big 12 against the other 3 conferences, they actually were only a total of 4 seeds lower, so those are pretty respectable losses by the Big 12 when you add it up that way. Let's look at the scoring margin. So in these 7 wins by the Big 12, they were close games. There were no blowouts by the Big 12 against anyone outside the conference. They only won all these games by 30 points, and 8 of those points were in an overtime game, so that's almost basically a tie. So the Big 12 won these games by only a little over 4 points per game. In the losses, they lost these games by 145 points, those 12 games. So that's over 12 points per game that the Big 12 was inferior to their opponents in the losses. Now let's go to winning percentage, because a particular conference, if they are, let's say, mediocre, if they're marginal, they're not great, but they're not bad, what should happen is better teams should defeat lesser teams, of course. In the Big 12, 7 wins. The teams that won those games for the Big 12 went 65-28. They won 70% of their games, 699 to be exact, against teams from the other conferences that won 54% of their games. And in terms of conference record, those Big 12 teams went 39-24, won 62% of their games, and they defeated teams out of the ACC, the Big 10, and the SEC that won an even 50% of its conference games. So once again, teams that won 70% of their games in the Big 12 defeated teams 7 times that won 54% of their games. So they should win those games. They're better teams. And in conference, this really tells us more, I think, that teams that won 62% winning percentage in the Big 12 defeated teams outside the conference that won 50% of their games in conference. In the losses, okay, out of these 12 games, those Big 12 teams went 83-70. They won 54% of their games against teams in the SEC, the ACC, and the Big 10 that won 65% of their games. But what's a telling stat here is that these are 12 consecutive losses by the Big 12. This is an 0-12 representation right here. And these Big 12 teams won almost 56% of their games in conference and lost 12 straight games to teams in the ACC, the Big 10, and the SEC that were only 1% better in winning percentage in their conference. And they lost all 12 of those games. You may say, Mark, there are some teams in the group of five that are actually better than Power 5 teams. Why don't we account for that? Well, we'll look at some of those games. The Big 12 lost 3 games against group of 5 teams. They are these games right here. Congratulations to UNLV out of the Mountain West. They almost single-handedly took down the Big 12, defeating Houston and Kansas. Also, West Virginia lost to Memphis 42-37 in a bowl game. Kansas State with the best group of 5 win by the Big 12 in defeating Tulane, who almost won the American Conference. And so the Big 12 went 15-3 against a group of 5. What does that mean? Well, we're going to have to see how the other conferences fared against a group of 5. Nobody in the power conferences this year lost to an FCS team. So everyone went undefeated, including the Big 12 at 14-0. Again, there's the 7-12 record against the ACC, the Big 10, and the SEC. Add it all up, and the Big 12 went 36-15 overall out of conference. And again, 36-15, does that sound good to you? Does it not sound good? Well, we're going to have to see how the other conferences fared. Again, we will make the comparison. All the winning percentages, the score differentials, the seeding differentials, how well you did against the Power 5 opponents. 7-12 doesn't sound too good, does it? The FCS records are, of course, perfect by all the conferences. And again, against the group of 5, the Big 12 at 15-3 sounds good. But how did the Big 10, the ACC, and the SEC fare against the group of 5? 36-15 is the overall record for the Big 12 against the other conferences. Keep in mind that, again, the Big 12 only played 19 games against the other 3 conferences. You will see records in the 30s by the other conferences. Why? Well, the Big 12 had less teams make postseason play. They flat out scheduled easier. They did not schedule as many non-conference games against power competition. There were certain teams in the Big 12 that didn't play anyone. And then also keep into consideration, because of the merge of the 4 teams from the Pac-12 into the Big 12, that they played a lot of out-of-conference, in-conference games, meaning Baylor played Utah. It was not a conference game. It was an out-of-conference game, but we don't count it here because it's just a one-for-one trade-off. Of course, you can't rate your own conference against each other. So the Big 12 had a number of those games. And again, we will gain clarity when we put all the numbers of all the conferences together and compare them conference by conference. Don't forget our Big 12 live show with Nathan Brown from Big 12 Mafia. It's every Monday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time on our Big 12 channel. Please like and subscribe. Leave those comments down below right here at the Voice of College Football.